I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia from the HOA marching across my lawn like she owned the place, her heels stabbing into the grass with each deliberate step. It was a Saturday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had just finished installing my new infrared heat lamps on my back patio, the kind that could warm a space even when the desert temperature dropped to 40 degrees on winter evenings. What I did not expect was for this woman to demand them as if they were community property. "Ryan Martinez, we need to have a conversation," Patricia announced, not bothering with pleasantries as she planted herself at the edge of my patio, squinting up at the 3 industrial units mounted to the pergola above. Her blonde highlights caught the morning sun, and her pressed white blazer screamed authority she probably did not actually possess. I set down my coffee mug on the outdoor table and turned to face her. "Morning, Patricia. What can I help you with?" "Those," she said, pointing a manicured finger at my heat lamps. "Those are far too nice to be wasted on just one household." The HOA has been discussing adding heat lamps to the community pavilion patio for evening events, and since you clearly have access to quality equipment, I think it would be generous of you to donate those to the cause. I blinked, certain I had misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" "The community would benefit greatly from those heat lamps. I have been researching options, and the models I have found online are quite expensive. Since you have already made the investment, it only makes sense for you to contribute them to the neighborhood. You can always buy more for yourself later." She said this as if it were the most reasonable suggestion in the world, her tone implying that disagreeing would make me a selfish neighbor. "Patricia, these cost me $4,000, I said slowly, gesturing to the 3 sleek black units overhead. "They're commercial restaurant-grade infrared heaters. I special ordered them because I host family gatherings out here year-round, and my mother has circulation issues that make her sensitive to cold. These are not something I can just replace on a whim." Her eyes widened slightly at the price tag, but she recovered quickly. "$4,000. For heat lamps? That seems excessive, Ryan. Are you sure you were not overcharged? The ones I have been looking at are maybe $200 each." "Those would be residential patio heaters," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "What I have here are commercial units that can heat up to 1,500 square feet each. They are designed for restaurants and outdoor venues. The reason they cost what they do is because they are built to last decades and can handle constant use." Patricia crossed her arms, her expression shifting from surprise to determination. "Well, if they are that powerful, then they are definitely needed for the community space more than your personal patio. I will be bringing this up at the next HOA board meeting. It is simply not fair for one household to monopolize such high-quality equipment when the entire neighborhood could benefit." "Monopolize," I repeated, feeling my patience starting to fray. "I bought these with my own money for my own property. There is no monopolizing involved. If the HOA wants heat lamps for the pavilion, they can budget for it and purchase their own." "The HOA operates on a tight budget, as you well know," Patricia said, her voice taking on that condescending tone that made my jaw tighten. "We have been trying to save money wherever possible, and when opportunities for donations arise, responsible community members step up. I would hate to have to note in the meeting minutes that you refuse to be a team player." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the audacity. "You are threatening to what, exactly? Shame me in meeting minutes because I would not give you $4,000 worth of equipment I just installed. I am simply pointing out that community involvement reflects on all of us," she said primly. "Now, when can we schedule the removal and installation at the pavilion? I was thinking next weekend would work well. We have the autumn social coming up in 3 weeks, and it would be wonderful to have them operational by then. Patricia, I am going to say this as clearly as I can. I am not giving you my heat lamps. They are not community property. They are my personal property that I installed on my personal patio. The answer is no. Her face flushed red, and her lips pressed into a thin line. We will see about that. The HOA board will be very interested to hear about this. I would not be surprised if there are regulations about the type of commercial equipment allowed in residential areas. I will be looking into that. She spun on her heel and marched back across my lawn, leaving divots in her wake. I stood there for a moment, coffee growing cold in my hand, and wondered how my peaceful Saturday morning had turned into this absurdity. My phone rang an hour later. It was my buddy Marcus, who lived 3 streets over in the same planned community of Desert Vista Estates. Dude, I just heard from Jenny that Patricia is telling everyone at the community center that you are hoarding restaurant equipment and refusing to share with the neighborhood. What is going on? I groaned and launched into the story. Marcus listened, then burst out laughing. Only Patricia would have the guts to demand someone hand over $4,000 worth of gear. That woman thinks the entire neighborhood exists to serve the HOA. Remember when she tried to fine the Johnsons for painting their front door navy instead of the approved midnight blue? She showed up with paint swatches like she was testifying in court. I remember, I said. I just cannot believe she is actually going to pursue this. There is no regulation against what type of heaters I can put on my own patio. You would think that would be obvious, Marcus agreed. But you know Patricia. She will find something to latch on to. She always does. My advice: document everything. Take pictures, keep records of your conversations, the whole 9 yards, cover your behind. I took his advice. After we hung up, I went outside and photographed the heat lamps from multiple angles, showing their installation location, the mounting hardware, and the model numbers. I also pulled up my purchase receipts and saved them to a dedicated folder on my computer. If Patricia was going to make this into a thing, I would be prepared. The following Tuesday, I received a formal letter in my mailbox from the Desert Vista Estates, HOA. It was printed on official letterhead, signed by Patricia in her capacity as HOA president, and copied to the other 4 board members. Dear Mr. Martinez, it began. It has come to the attention of the HOA board that you have installed commercial-grade heating equipment on your residential property without seeking prior approval. As per Section 7.3 of the Desert Vista Estates Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, any exterior modifications that alter the visual aesthetic or function of a property must be submitted for architectural review before installation. Failure to comply with this requirement may result in fines and mandatory removal of non-approved additions. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise. The heat lamps were mounted under my pergola, barely visible from the street. They were sleek, black, and blended perfectly with the existing structure. To claim they altered the visual aesthetic was a stretch at best. The letter continued. Additionally, there are concerns regarding the safety and appropriateness of commercial-grade equipment in a residential setting. The board requests that you appear at the next HOA meeting on Thursday, October 12th, at 7 p.m. in the community center to address these concerns and discuss potential remediation options. Remediation options. That was code for demanding I take them down or hand them over. I called my lawyer that afternoon. David Ramirez had helped me with the purchase of my house 2 years ago and was familiar with HOA law in Arizona. Ryan, good to hear from you, David said when he picked up. What can I do for you? I explained the situation, reading him the letter verbatim. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Okay, so let me make sure I understand this correctly. You installed heat lamps on your back patio, under an existing pergola structure, and the HOA president is claiming you need architectural approval and is also suggesting they are somehow unsafe or inappropriate. That is correct. And before all this, she literally asked me to donate them to the HOA for their community pavilion. When I refused, suddenly they are a code violation. David made a thoughtful sound. That is what we call retaliatory enforcement, and it is not legal in Arizona. HOAs cannot selectively enforce rules based on personal grievances. Do you have documentation of her initial request? It was a verbal conversation, but I can write up a detailed account of what was said. My neighbor Marcus heard about it secondhand within an hour because Patricia was apparently spreading her version around the community. Write it up anyway, with as much detail as you can remember, including date, time, and exact location. As for the architectural review requirement, let me look at your CC and Articus. Can you email me a copy? I will send it right now. I spent the next hour composing a detailed timeline of events, from the moment Patricia approached me on Saturday morning to receiving the formal letter. I included her exact words as best as I could recall them, and noted the sequence of events that made it clear this was retaliation for refusing her demand. David called me back that evening. I reviewed your CC and Articus. Section 7.3 does require architectural review, but it specifically applies to modifications that are visible from the street or that alter the existing structure. Heat lamps mounted under an existing pergola in your backyard would not typically fall under this requirement, especially since they are not visible from the front of the property. The CC and Articus also include a reasonableness clause, meaning the board cannot enforce rules in an arbitrary or capricious manner. So what do I do about the meeting? You attend, you state your case calmly and professionally, and you do not let them bully you. I will prepare a letter for you to bring, outlining the legal position. If they continue to push this, we may need to escalate, but hopefully a firm legal response will shut it down. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. I walked into the Desert Vista Estates Community Center at 6:50 p.m., dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, carrying a folder with my documentation and David's letter. The meeting room was set up with chairs facing a long table where the 5 board members sat. Patricia occupied the center seat, flanked by 2 members on each side. I recognized most of them. Tom Henderson, a retired accountant, Linda Shaw, a real estate agent, Bruce Yamamoto, an engineer, and Deanne Foster, a school teacher. About 20 other residents were scattered throughout the audience chairs. I spotted Marcus near the back, who gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, running through routine business items like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Finally, 40 minutes in, she cleared her throat and shuffled her papers. We now come to a matter of some concern regarding non-approved architectural modifications. Mr. Martinez, would you please come forward? I stood and walked to the front, very aware of the eyes following me. Patricia gestured to a chair facing the board, positioned like I was on trial. Mr. Martinez, you received our letter regarding the commercial heating equipment you installed without prior approval. Would you like to explain your actions? I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. I installed 3 infrared heat lamps under my existing pergola structure on my back patio. They are mounted flush against the beams and are not visible from the street. I did not believe architectural approval was necessary because they do not alter the structure and do not affect the visual aesthetic of the community. The board determines what requires approval, not individual homeowners, Patricia said. The fact remains that you installed commercial-grade equipment without permission. Can you explain why you felt residential-grade heaters were insufficient? My mother has health issues that make her sensitive to cold, and we host family gatherings year-round. Commercial-grade heaters provide better, more consistent heat coverage. It is a practical decision based on my family's needs. Linda Shaw, the real estate agent, leaned forward. Patricia mentioned these cost $4,000. That seems quite expensive. Are you certain they are appropriate for residential use? They are designed for outdoor spaces, which includes both commercial and residential applications, I said. They meet all safety standards and are all listed. I have the specifications here if you would like to review them. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. That would not change the fact that you violated the architectural review requirement. The board needs to discuss appropriate consequences. Actually, I said, pulling out David's letter, I have a letter here from my attorney that addresses the legal aspects of this situation. The CC and Articus specify that architectural review applies to modifications visible from the street or that alter existing structures. My heat lamps meet neither criterion. Furthermore, selective enforcement of rules based on personal grievances is not permitted under Arizona HOA law. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's expression hardened. Are you threatening legal action against the HOA? I am pointing out that this action appears to be retaliatory in nature, given that it came immediately after I declined your request to donate my heat lamps to the community pavilion. A murmur went through the audience. Several people pulled out their phones, probably texting this juicy detail to neighbors who had not attended. Bruce Yamamoto, the engineer, spoke up. Patricia, did you ask Mr. Martinez to donate his equipment to the HOA? Patricia's face flushed. I suggested that it would be a generous community contribution. We have been looking for heat lamps for the pavilion, and it seemed reasonable to inquire whether he would be willing to share resources. Share resources, I repeated. You demanded I give you $4,000 worth of equipment I had just installed and suggested I could buy more for myself later. When I declined, you sent me a violation letter 3 days later. The timeline speaks for itself. Tom Henderson, the accountant, looked uncomfortable. Patricia, if that is the case, this does look problematic. We cannot enforce rules based on personal disputes. This is not a personal dispute, Patricia insisted, her voice rising. This is about maintaining community standards and ensuring that one homeowner does not benefit from equipment that could serve everyone. But it is his equipment, Deanne Foster said, frowning. He bought it for his own property. I am not understanding how we have any claim to it. The point is that commercial equipment does not belong in a residential neighborhood, Patricia said firmly. It sets a bad precedent. What is next? Someone installing a commercial kitchen, a commercial pool system. We have to draw a line somewhere. Those are false equivalencies, I said. Heat lamps for an outdoor patio are not comparable to installing a commercial kitchen. And if we are talking about precedent, I would point out that the community pavilion itself has commercial-grade barbecue grills and commercial playground equipment. The distinction you are trying to make is arbitrary. Several board members exchanged glances. Linda Shaw bit her lip, looking conflicted. Bruce Yamamoto picked up his copy of the CC and Articus and started flipping through it. Patricia sensed she was losing control of the situation. I move that we table this discussion and form a subcommittee to research the issue further before making a final determination. I second, Tom Henderson said quickly, probably eager to end the uncomfortable confrontation. All in favor? Patricia asked. 4 hands went up, including hers. Only Diane Foster abstained, still looking uncertain. The motion passes. Mr. Martinez, you will hear from us within 30 days regarding the board's decision. In the meantime, you are not to make any additional modifications to your property. I was not planning to, I said evenly. I gathered my folder and returned to my seat, feeling the weight of multiple conversations starting up around me. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me in the parking lot. "That was intense," said a woman I recognized from the next street over. "I cannot believe Patricia actually tried to get you to hand over your stuff. That is wild." "I have been dealing with her for 3 years," said an older man named George. "She tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of rock in my front yard landscaping. Turned out the rock I had was within the approved color range, but she insisted it looked different in certain light. Cost me $500 in landscaping consultation fees to prove I was right." Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled that well, man." "Did you see her face when you brought up the attorney letter? I thought she was going to combust." "I just want this to be over," I admitted. "I want to use my heat lamps and not have to deal with HOA drama. With Patricia." "Good luck with that," George said. "She does not let things go." "You just made yourself enemy number 1. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Patricia driving past my house more frequently than usual, always slowing down to look at my patio. Once, I caught her standing at the corner of my property with her phone out, apparently taking photos. Then things escalated. I came home from work one Wednesday afternoon to find a notice taped to my front door. This one was not about the heat lamps. It was a violation notice for my garbage cans being visible from the street outside of designated trash collection hours. The problem was that trash day was Wednesday, and it was only 4 p.m. The notice claimed the violation occurred at 2 p.m., but the trash had not even been collected yet. I checked my doorbell camera footage, which clearly showed the garbage truck arriving at 1:30 p.m. and the trash cans sitting at the curb for pickup, exactly as they were supposed to. 2 days later, another notice. This time for weeds in my front yard landscaping. I went outside and inspected every inch of my xeriscaped yard. There were no weeds. The landscaping company I hired came every 2 weeks, and they had just been there on Monday. I called David again. "She is harassing you," he said after I explained the situation. "Document everything. Save the notices, save your camera footage, keep records of your landscaping service. We are building a case for harassment and selective enforcement." "How long is this going to go on?" "Until she either backs off or we take legal action. HOA disputes can be lengthy, unfortunately. But you are doing everything right. Keep your property in perfect condition, follow all legitimate rules, and let her tie herself in knots with these frivolous violations." The subcommittee never contacted me. The 30-day deadline came and went with no word from the board. I sent a certified letter to the HOA requesting an update, as David advised. No response. Meanwhile, the violations kept coming. My mailbox was supposedly the wrong color, even though it had been that color when I bought the house 2 years ago and matched every other mailbox in the neighborhood. My house numbers were allegedly too small, even though they met the county's visibility requirements. My doormat was cited as a non-approved decorative element. Each time, I documented everything and proved the violation was either false or so minor as to be absurd. Other neighbors started sharing their own stories of sudden violation notices from Patricia. It became clear she was not just targeting me anymore, but anyone she perceived as having sided with me at that meeting. Marcus got a notice about his basketball hoop being 3 inches over the height limit. George was cited for parking his car in his own driveway at an improper angle. The woman from the next street over was written up for having seasonal decorations that were supposedly too large, even though they were within the size limits specified in the rules. She is making enemies left and right, Marcus told me over beers one evening in early November. I have been talking to people, and at least 15 households have gotten bogus violation notices in the past month. People are getting organized. There is talk of a petition to recall her from the board. Can that actually work? According to the CC and Articus, yes. If 20% of homeowners sign a recall petition, it triggers a special election. Desert Vista has 200 homes, so we would need 40 signatures. I think we can get that easily. He was right. Within a week, the petition had 63 signatures. Neighbors I barely knew stopped me to tell me they had signed and to share their own Patricia horror stories. The woman was universally disliked, it turned out. But until now, people had been too intimidated or apathetic to do anything about it. The petition was formally submitted to the HOA board on November 10th. According to the rules, the board had 10 days to verify the signatures and schedule a special election within 45 days. Patricia's response was to send me another letter. Dear Mr. Martinez, the subcommittee has completed its review of your unauthorized commercial heating equipment. It is the determination of the board that said equipment must be removed within 30 days, or you will face fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Additionally, you must restore your patio to its original condition and submit plans for any future modifications through the proper architectural review process. I forwarded the letter to David immediately. This is it, he said. This is the ammunition we need. They have no legitimate basis for this order, and the timing, right after the recall petition, makes it even more clearly retaliatory. I am going to file an injunction to prevent them from enforcing this, and we are going to pursue a lawsuit for harassment and breach of fiduciary duty. What are my chances? Very good. Arizona courts do not look kindly on HOAs that abuse their authority. The pattern of harassment, the selective enforcement, the retaliatory timing, it all works in your favor. Plus, we have the original incident where she demanded your property. No reasonable judge is going to side with the HOA on this. David filed the paperwork on November 15th. The HOA was served with notice of the lawsuit, and the temporary restraining order preventing them from fining me or demanding removal of the heat lamps. I also filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA conduct in the state. The special election was scheduled for December 15th. In the meantime, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with drama. Someone created a Facebook group called Desert Vista Estates, HOA Reform, that quickly grew to over 100 members. People shared their violation notices, compared experiences, and discussed what changes they wanted to see in the HOA's governance. Patricia, meanwhile, doubled down. She sent a mass email to all homeowners claiming that I was a troublemaker who was trying to destroy the community's property values, and that the recall effort was orchestrated by a small group of malcontents who did not respect the rules that kept Desert Vista a desirable place to live. The email backfired spectacularly. Multiple residents responded publicly, pointing out specific instances of Patricia's overreach and abuse of power. Linda Shaw, one of the board members, resigned with a public statement saying she could no longer support the board's direction under Patricia's leadership. The lawsuit moved forward. David deposed Patricia, and I got to read the transcript later. She maintained that her request for me to donate the heat lamps was a casual suggestion, not a demand, and that the violation notices were based purely on legitimate concerns about community standards. When confronted with the timeline and the pattern of violations against me and others who signed the recall petition, she claimed it was coincidental. Mrs. Patricia Henderson, David had asked, is it your testimony that it is merely a coincidence that Mr. Martinez received 6 violation notices in the span of 6 weeks after declining your request for his heat lamps, when he had received 0 violations in the 2 years prior to that incident? The violations were legitimate, Patricia insisted. If he had not violated the rules, he would not have received notices. The timing is irrelevant. And is it also coincidental that 15 other homeowners who signed the recall petition also received violation notices during that same period? People who disregard community standards tend to associate with like-minded individuals. It is not surprising that rule breakers would band together. The deposition went on for 3 hours, and by the end, David felt confident we had a strong case. December 15th arrived cold and clear. The special election was held at the community center, with voting open from noon to 8 p.m. I went at 6 p.m. after work and found the parking lot packed. Inside, a line of residents waited to cast their ballots. The atmosphere felt like a referendum on more than just Patricia's presidency. It felt like people were voting on what kind of community they wanted to be. Marcus was working as one of the volunteer ballot monitors. He grinned when he saw me. Turnout is incredible. We have had over 100 people vote already, and there are still 2 hours to go. I cast my ballot to recall Patricia and to elect Bruce Yamamoto as the new president. Bruce had stepped up to run after Linda Shaw resigned, and his platform was simple: fair enforcement of rules, transparency in board decisions, and respect for homeowners' property rights. The ballots were counted that night, with volunteers from both sides observing. The results were announced at 9:30 p.m. Patricia was recalled by a vote of 143 to 32. Bruce Yamamoto was elected president with 121 votes. The room erupted in applause. I watched Patricia gather her belongings, her face pale and tight. She left through a side door without speaking to anyone. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the legal case was not over. Even though Patricia was no longer HOA president, the organization itself was still a defendant in my lawsuit. The new board, under Bruce's leadership, approached David about settling. They want to drop all violations against you, issue a formal apology, and pay your legal fees, David told me over the phone. They are also proposing policy reforms to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. In exchange, you would agree not to pursue damages against the HOA. What about Patricia personally? We can still pursue claims against her individually if you want. But that would be a longer, more expensive fight, and recovery might be difficult depending on her personal assets. I thought about it. I had never wanted to destroy anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to use my heat lamps in peace. I will take the settlement, I said, but I want the apology to be public, sent to all homeowners, and I want the policy reforms in writing. Done. The settlement was finalized in January. The HOA sent a letter to all residents acknowledging that I had been subjected to inappropriate selective enforcement and harassment, and that the previous board had failed in its fiduciary duty to govern fairly. The letter outlined new policies. All architectural review decisions would follow clear, written standards. Violation notices would require photographic evidence and a reasonable opportunity to cure. and any homeowner who felt they were being unfairly targeted could request a review by an independent third party. My legal fees, which had topped $12,000, were paid in full by the HOA's insurance company. The heat lamps stayed exactly where they were. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she put her house on the market in February and moved to Scottsdale. I never saw her again. On a warm evening in late March, I hosted a family gathering on my patio. My mother sat comfortably under the gentle warmth of the infrared heat lamps, wrapped in a light shawl, laughing at something my nephew said. My siblings and their families filled the space with conversation and the smell of grilled food. Marcus came over with a six-pack of beer. "I still cannot believe the whole saga," he said, settling into a chair. "All that drama over heat lamps." "It was never really about the heat lamps," I said. "It was about power and control. Patricia thought she could push people around, and when someone finally pushed back, she could not handle it. Well, the neighborhood is better off without her. Bruce is doing a great job. Did you see the newsletter? They are finally fixing the irrigation system in the common areas and repainting the pavilion. Actual useful projects instead of measuring everyone's mailbox heights." I raised my beer in a toast. "To reasonable HOA boards." "I will drink to that," Marcus said, clinking his bottle against mine. The heat lamps hummed softly above us, radiating warmth into the cooling desert night. They had cost me $4,000, $12,000 in legal fees and months of stress. But looking around at my family, comfortable and happy, I would not change a thing. Except maybe I would have gotten the heat lamps with remote controls. Walking over to the wall switch every time I wanted to adjust them was a minor inconvenience. But that was a problem for another day. The new HOA board proved to be everything Bruce had promised. Monthly meetings became shorter and more focused on actual community needs, rather than nitpicking individual homeowners. The Facebook group evolved from a complaint forum into a genuine community resource where neighbors helped each other with recommendations for contractors, organized social events, and coordinated neighborhood watch efforts. In April, the HOA finally installed heat lamps at the community pavilion. They were nice residential units, not commercial grade like mine, but perfectly adequate for the space. Bruce called me to ask if I wanted to be on the selection committee, which I found slightly ironic but appreciated nonetheless. "We have a budget of $2,000, he explained. "I figured you might have insights given your research into the topic." I helped them choose a set of 6 propane-powered units that would provide good coverage for the pavilion's seating area. When they were installed for the spring community social in May, Patricia's name never came up. It was as if the entire incident had been absorbed into neighborhood lore, a cautionary tale people referenced vaguely without dwelling on specifics. My mother asked about it once, several months later, while we sat on the patio during a family dinner in July. The heat lamps were off since it was summer and still 90 degrees at 8 p.m., but they hung above us like silent guardians. "Did that woman ever apologize to you directly?" she asked. "No," I said. "The HOA issued a formal apology, but Patricia herself never reached out." "Some people cannot admit when they are wrong," my mother said. "Their pride would not allow it. I imagine she convinced herself she was right the whole time." "Probably," I agreed, "but it does not matter anymore. It is over." And it was. The heat lamps continued to work perfectly through the following winter. I used them constantly during the cooler months, and they performed exactly as advertised, providing consistent, comfortable warmth for my family gatherings. My mother never complained about being cold when she visited, and I never received another violation notice from the HOA. The lawsuit settlement and Patricia's recall became something of a local legend in Desert Vista Estates. New neighbors who moved in would eventually hear some version of the story, often embellished with details that never happened. In one version I heard, Patricia had supposedly tried to physically remove the heat lamps herself and been chased off by my security cameras. In another, she had threatened to sue me for damages to her reputation. None of it was true, but I stopped correcting people after a while. The real story was dramatic enough on its own. What mattered most to me was the precedent it set. Homeowners in Desert Vista now knew they could challenge the HOA when it overstepped its authority, and they had a process for removing board members who abused their power. The reforms implemented after the settlement made the HOA more accountable and transparent. It was not perfect, no HOA ever is, but it was significantly better than what we had under Patricia's leadership. I ran into Tom Henderson, the former board member, at the grocery store one afternoon in September. He had voted with Patricia through most of the heat lamp controversy, and I had not spoken to him since. "Ryan," he said, looking somewhat uncomfortable, "I have been meaning to talk to you. I want to apologize for how that whole situation was handled. I should have pushed back harder against Patricia. I knew she was out of line, but I went along with it because it was easier than making waves." "I appreciate that," I said. "I know she could be intimidating." "That is no excuse," Tom said. "I was on that board to represent the community, and I failed to do that. I should have stood up for what was right instead of what was convenient. I am sorry." We shook hands, and that was the end of it. I never held a grudge against Tom or the other board members. They had been as much victims of Patricia's bullying as anyone, just in a different way. By the time autumn rolled around again, a full year after the initial confrontation, life in Desert Vista Estates had returned to a comfortable normalcy. The HOA functioned smoothly under Bruce's leadership, focusing on maintaining property values through reasonable standards and actual community improvements, rather than petty enforcement actions. My heat lamps continued to be the envy of the neighborhood, but now people just admired them rather than demanding I hand them over. Several neighbors asked for recommendations when they decided to upgrade their own patio heating, and I was happy to share information about different options and where to find them. In November, Bruce approached me about joining the HOA board. One of the members was moving out of state and they needed to fill the vacancy. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, "but I am going to decline. I have had enough of HOA politics for one lifetime." Bruce laughed. "I completely understand, but if you ever change your mind, the door is open. You have proven you are willing to stand up for what is right, and we need more people like that." I thought about it later that evening, sitting on my patio with the heat lamps glowing warmly overhead as the temperature dropped into the 50s. Maybe someday I would consider it. But for now, I was content to be a regular homeowner who followed the rules, maintained his property, and enjoyed his commercial-grade heat lamps without drama. The entire experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I had not kept detailed records, taken photos, and saved every piece of correspondence, the legal case would have been much harder to prove. Second, bullies eventually overreach. Patricia had gotten away with her behavior for so long that she became careless, and when she finally pushed too far, it unraveled everything. Third, most people are reasonable when given the chance. The majority of my neighbors were not petty tyrants like Patricia. They just wanted a nice place to live and did not want the hassle of challenging an abusive board. Once someone stood up and made it clear that challenging the board was possible, they rallied. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is expensive and stressful and you would rather just avoid the conflict. If I had backed down, if I had given Patricia the heat lamps or removed them when she demanded, it would not have ended there. She would have continued targeting me and others, emboldened by the lack of resistance. By fighting back, I not only protected my own rights but helped create a better community for everyone. The heat lamps themselves, the physical objects that sparked the entire conflict, were just tools. They provided warmth and comfort, which was their intended purpose. But they also became symbols of something larger: the right of homeowners to enjoy their property without unreasonable interference, and the importance of holding HOAs accountable when they abuse their authority. On Christmas Eve, a year and 2 months after Patricia first demanded my heat lamps, I hosted the biggest family gathering yet. 23 people crammed onto my patio, spilling into the backyard, bundled in light jackets as the temperature dropped to 42 degrees. The 3 commercial-grade infrared heat lamps worked overtime, creating a warm zone that made the cold desert evening comfortable. My mother, now 76, held court from her favorite chair directly under the middle lamp, her circulation issues kept at bay by the steady infrared warmth. She told stories about Christmases past, and my younger relatives listened with the polite attention that grandchildren specialize in, occasionally glancing at their phones but mostly present in the moment. Marcus showed up around 8 p.m. with his wife and kids. "This is amazing," his wife said, looking up at the heat lamps. "It is like being inside but outside." "That is exactly what I was going for," I said. "Commercial restaurants figured this out years ago. I just applied the same principle to my home." "And nearly started a civil war in the neighborhood," Marcus added with a grin. "Details," I said, handing him a beer. Later, after most people had gone home and only a few stragglers remained, Bruce Yamamoto stopped by with a bottle of wine as a thank you for helping with the pavilion heat lamp selection. "The community social last week was a huge success," he said. "People stayed outside way later than usual because of the heating. We are already planning more evening events for winter." "That is great," I said. "That is what community spaces are supposed to be used for." "I have been thinking about the whole situation with Patricia," Bruce said, settling into a chair. "I was on the board back then, and I am not proud of how I handled it. I should have challenged her more directly instead of just abstaining from votes or staying quiet. I let her create a toxic environment because it was easier than confronting her." "You stepped up when it mattered," I pointed out. "You ran for president and won, and you have done a great job since then. That is what counts." "Maybe," Bruce said. "But I think about what could have happened if you had not fought back. She would have gotten worse, not better. The HOA would have become unbearable. By standing your ground, you forced all of us to take a hard look at how we were operating. So thank you for that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the heat lamps humming above us, the night air crisp and cool everywhere except in the warm bubble they created. "Do you ever hear anything about Patricia?" I asked eventually. "Not really," Bruce said. "I heard she moved to a condo in Scottsdale with no HOA. Ironic, right? She spent years enforcing rules on others but chose to live somewhere without them herself." "Makes sense in a way," I said. "Control was what she wanted, not community, and HOA presidency gave her that. Once she lost it, there was no reason to stay." Bruce left around midnight, and I finally turned off the heat lamps and went inside. The house was quiet, smelling of the dinner we had cooked earlier, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. The long battle was over, the community was better for it, and my heat lamps were exactly where they belonged. In the years that followed, the story became part of Desert Vista Estates folklore, a tale told to new residents as both a warning and a reassurance. A warning that HOAs could overstep if left unchecked, and a reassurance that homeowners had rights and the ability to push back when necessary. The heat lamps served me well for many years, requiring minimal maintenance and performing flawlessly every winter. They outlasted Patricia's presidency, outlasted several subsequent HOA boards, and became a permanent fixture of my patio. Eventually, they became such a familiar sight that people stopped remarking on them. They were just part of Ryan Martinez's house, like the palm tree in the front yard or the blue trim around the windows. And that, ultimately, was exactly what I had wanted from the beginning. Not attention, not drama, not a neighborhood legend. Just the quiet enjoyment of my property and the ability to keep my mother warm during family gatherings. The commercial-grade heat lamps did their job perfectly, providing years of reliable service. But their real value was not measured in BTUs or square feet of coverage. It was measured in the family memories created under their warmth, the community reforms their controversy sparked, and the reminder they provided that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stand your ground and refuse to be bullied. Patricia demanded my heat lamps for her patio and froze when she saw they were commercial restaurant grade, not because of the equipment itself, but because she realized she had picked a fight with someone who would not back down. That was the moment the balance of power shifted, even though it took months to fully play out. In that instant, when I explained what she was really asking for, and she understood the true value of what she demanded, something changed. She could have backed off gracefully, laughed it off as a misunderstanding, and moved on. Instead, she doubled down, and that decision ultimately cost her everything. I learned that standing up for yourself often has costs. Legal fees, stress, time, and energy that could have been spent on more pleasant things. But I also learned that not standing up for yourself has costs too, often higher ones that compound over time. If I had given in to Patricia's initial demand, I would have lost far more than $4,000 in equipment. I would have lost my self-respect and set a precedent that I could be pushed around. The heat lamps were worth fighting for, not because they were expensive or high quality, but because they represented a principle. My right to enjoy my property as I saw fit within reasonable bounds. That principle was worth defending, and I would make the same choice again if faced with a similar situation. As I sit here years later, the heat lamp still humming reliably above my patio, I sometimes think about Patricia and wonder if she ever reflects on how things went wrong. Does she recognize that her own actions caused her downfall? Or has she constructed a narrative where she was the victim of a vindictive neighbor and a disloyal community? I will never know, and it does not really matter. What matters is that Desert Vista Estates became a better place to live because of what happened. The HOA operates more fairly and transparently. Homeowners feel empowered to challenge unreasonable enforcement. Board members understand that their power is limited and must be exercised responsibly. These outcomes were worth the fight. The heat lamps glow warmly on my patio tonight, as they do every winter evening when the desert temperature drops and my family gathers for dinner. They are just machines, metal and quartz and electrical components, but they have become so much more in my mind. They are symbols of resilience, of standing up for what is right, and of the importance of community accountability. And they are also very good at keeping my mother warm during family gatherings, which was the original point all along. Sometimes the simplest goals require the most complicated journeys to achieve. But looking around at my family, comfortable and happy under the warmth of those commercial-grade heat lamps I fought so hard to keep, I know the journey was worth it. The story ends not with drama or conflict, but with exactly what I wanted from the start. A peaceful evening with my family, warm despite the cold desert night, gathered together under the reliable glow of heat lamps that nobody will ever take from me.